we would like, ooh, recording in progress. Great, thank you. Um, and then we would like to honor the 9-year-olds in our congregation. One of them, Asa Collins, who unfortunately couldn't be with us this morning, actually asked two questions. And I'm going to answer one of them in a minute. But Asa's first question, which I think is brilliant, was, why do you want to know my question? I love that. It's such a you question, right? Now, this whole affirmation ritual ceremony was created because we want to know the kids' questions. Asking questions is foundational to the UU faith. Our first source states, direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. That's a mouthful. I mean, nobody memorizes that, and it's a lot for a 9-year-old to get. But I think everybody can get that what it comes down to is that we really value exploring the world and its incredible and vast mysteries, and that we encourage everyone of all ages to nurture their curiosity, their wonder at this incredible experience of life. And at 9 years old, all of us get to the point where we're old enough to start forming really complicated and deep questions and observations about the world. And we want to honor that. We want to encourage that. We want to see that get carried into adulthood. You know, most religions have a way of affirming the gift to their communities that their 9-year-olds are. Because these 9-year-olds, they bring to us curiosity and a great capacity for expressions of wonder. And rites of passage for this age group let the kids know that our congregation belongs to them and that the adults take them seriously. Now, in the faith I grew up in, the Roman Catholic Church, this is the time when a 9-year-old is considered old enough to take the host in the act of the Eucharist. It's a way of saying, you may not be legally an adult yet, but you're growing up and you're ready to be with the grown-ups now. And in our affirmation services, we get these kids to ask questions. And they always ask great, amazing questions. They're big theological questions that get to the heart of what we do and who we are as Unitarian Universalists and as humans. And I got to tell you, this year's questions were tough. So let's start with Sylvan Roman Fox's question. He asked, what's the difference between human brains and animal brains? Well, you know, I'm not a scientist, but I know that we humans are animals ourselves. And so our brains work pretty similarly to the brains of other animals. But I can't be super specific about the differences. I'm not sure we would even have the time for that anyway. But as near as I can tell, the only difference is that humans probably have slightly more complicated brain function, or at least different brain function. Most of us can organize our thoughts and act on them. And our bodies have things like opposable thumbs and legs that can hold us upright on just 2 legs. So we can do things like make tools and build things that are a little more complicated than beaver dams or birds' nests. Plus, we have the ability to really use complicated language to communicate with each other. We can say, I like you, I love you, or I adore you, all of which means slightly different things, and we have the ability to understand the difference. Now, put those complex thoughts together with these complex actions that we're capable of, and we can do things that animals can't do. Probably foremost of which is that we can write our thoughts down and spread those thoughts all over the world if we want to. And animals can't do that because their brains and their bodies aren't quite as complex as ours, and they weren't really built to function in a world that we created for ourselves. But animals still feel emotions. Elephants will walk miles to grieve with other elephants when one of them dies. Dolphins and penguins and other animals form loving, lifelong relationships with spouses that they take care of and raise families with. Dogs know when we're sad and they try their best to comfort us, and they even accompany us in our grief. And scientists are just starting to understand the ways in which plants and even microbes communicate with each other and share information. And they don't even have brains. So the important thing to know is that all living things, regardless of what kind of nervous system or brain they all have the ability to feel pain, to communicate, and even to express compassion for other living things. And just because our unique combination of brains and bodies are a little different, it doesn't make us any better or more important than other living things. It just gives us a little more responsibility to take care of every living thing. So Asa Collins, as I said, asked a second question. And I love this question. And honestly, it's not the first time I've heard this question in a 9-year-old affirmation. Asa asked, how do I get my siblings to pull their own weight around the house? And I want to tell you a little bit. Well, first of all, I want to start by telling you that this is such an age-old issue, the conflict between siblings, that it's one of the first stories in the Bible, Cain and Abel, right? So I want to start by telling you a little bit about my home. I live with my husband, Reverend Joe, and he knows that I hate waiting in lines. Lines make me impatient and very grumpy and sometimes even angry. He always says that the depth of my impatience is confounding to him. So when we moved here and we had to register our cars, guess who went to the registry and stood in line? I'll tell you, it was not me. But when we moved into our house and found that all of that 160-year-old woodwork had to be stripped and sanded and repainted because it was chipping and peeling, guess who did that? Guess who's still doing that after 9 months? See, that I have patience for. Now, Reverend Joe would rather eat paint for breakfast than do that kind of work. Now, he usually feeds the dog, but sometimes he asks me to do it. And I almost always do the vacuuming, but sometimes I ask him to do it. And when we're asked, we almost always say yes. But I have to admit that sometimes after days, especially when it's really hot, of being covered with sanding dust and paint chips, I wish that Joe would help me. And I know that after 4 trips to the registry, he wished that I would take some of that responsibility. We both, if we're honest, have to work to make sure that we don't get resentful, that we continue to appreciate each other's strengths and weaknesses and limitations. The funny thing is, though, like I said, whenever one of us asks the other to do something, we almost always say yes. And I've noticed that it's like that around here in our congregation too. When we ask folks to do something, they usually say yes. And a lot of times they just don't know what to do. So they're kind of waiting for someone to tell them or ask them. And between church and home, here's what I've learned. Most people do whatever they can and give whatever they can. Most people. And you'll be a lot happier if you can just accept people for who they are. Because when you really appreciate for people for who they are, you come to respect them for exactly who they are. Your life is easier. You know what they love, how they take care of themselves, what they can do and can't do, what they love doing and what makes them grumpy. So if you know your sibling hates vacuuming, don't ask, because it's not going to happen. But if you know they have the patience to mow the lawn or brush the dog, Ask them to do that. Then the best thing that you can do is ask them to do something with you. Because when you do things together, you get to know each other better and make memories that you'll share for a lifetime. So Maisie Grant asked, how did everything get to be this way? How did the trees start growing? How did animals start being alive? I don't believe God just created it all. Now, is that the most you question ever asked, or what? So I told Maisie, I don't know. Nobody knows for sure. There are a lot of different theories about what happened, and the most widely accepted scientific answer is called the Big Bang Theory. The idea that there was an explosion that created the universe, and it was an explosion that was so great that it's still happening, so the universe is still expanding. The idea is that it happened billions of years ago, and that life has evolved here on Earth, and probably other planets in the universe, over hundreds of millions of years. And life here started with primordial ooze that slowly evolved into more complex life forms, and eventually humans and other animals and plants and microscopic life. But of course, that begs the question, what existed before the Big Bang? And what caused it to happen? Are there more universes? And if so, are the universes related to each other? Like, can we move between universes the way they do in the movies? I mean, who knows? But I think it's a lot of fun to think about, isn't it? Sometimes I think about how once upon a time, scientists thought that the smallest thing in the world was a cell. But now we know that cells, even though they're only visible through a microscope, actually are made up of tiny complex particles. And those particles are made up of even smaller bits called atoms. And if you split atoms apart, you can make a super bomb, a powerful bomb that can destroy cities. And I think about how really there's a whole universe inside of a single cell. And what if the entire thing we call our universe is actually just one of millions of cells inside of the body of some larger creature, some larger being? And what if what seems like a billion years in our universe is a blip in time for the creature that we live inside of? Could we call that creature God? I don't know. I have no idea how our universe came to be. None of us will probably ever know the answer to that question. But if we keep wondering and keep being open to new discoveries and new understanding, life can be pretty amazing. So amazing that you might even call it a miracle. But the trick is to keep thinking of it as a miracle and to share your thoughts with people who are interested in joining you as you ponder. And that's what I would call faith. Trusting that the people that you're surrounded by, the people who belong to you, want to continue joining you as you ponder. So even though we don't know how we got here, we know that it matters. So Tuz Rudicurto asked, why are there so many different religions? Why can't everyone just agree on one? So the Earth has always been an incredibly diverse place with deserts and oceans, mountains and plains, perpetual summers in some places and never-ending winters in others. So I want you to think about a time when there were a lot fewer people on this incredibly diverse planet. And they lived in pretty small groups. And each of those had really different experiences from each other because of the climates and terrains that they lived in. And all of those different communities with different climates and different terrains, they're all trying to make sense of the world around them, the world that they knew. So people in deserts asked, Why does the sun have the power to give life and to kill? And people in more temperate places with seasons like this asked, why do we have hot summers and terrible storms that come up from the sea during parts of the year? Everybody all over the world was asking, who or what is controlling our environment? And why does it have so much impact on our lives? Do they know how much this hurts us? Are they trying to hurt us? And you know what's funny? Almost all of those communities of people and their limited experiences came up with similar answers. They imagined powerful and wise elders who usually had gray hair that was long, and if they envisioned them as a father, they had beards. And these elders were there long before them, and they created and controlled everything. Sometimes they imagined that there was more than one wise elder creator. Sometimes they imagined that there were many. And some called the creator Father Son, some called it Mother Earth, some called it the Great Spirit. Everyone had a different name, a different face or faces to go with the name. But now, in our language, we call them all God. And that's a universal term for the creator. Now, these different communities over millions of years became very attached to their ideas of God because those ideas made sense to them in the worlds that they lived in. And they felt protected by their beliefs, and their beliefs were what bound those communities together. They belonged to each other because they believed the same thing. And that's what we call religion. Now, as these communities became larger and people started being able to move around the world and to encounter each other, they all came face to face with new religions, different understandings of God and why the world is what it is and why people are the way that they are. And they didn't agree always. In fact, they rarely agreed. But each of those communities held on to their beliefs for so long they weren't about to let them go. So they fought. Now that sounds simple enough, right? But here's where it gets even more complicated. Almost every religion has experienced huge arguments among themselves that have caused them to split up into smaller groups. So here's an example. In one of the oldest religions on earth, Judaism, there was a popular teacher named Jesus who was killed. The people who followed his teaching after his death came to be known as Christians, so they weren't Jews anymore. They weren't pagans anymore. And after the Christians had been around a couple of hundred years, they started arguing among themselves. Some believed that God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit were all one being. And others believed that God is God, that Jesus was Jesus and perfectly human, and that the Holy Spirit is within each one of us. Now, the first group came to be known as the Trinitarians, and the second group came to be known as Unitarians. So our ancestors split away from most Christians almost 1,700 years ago. Now, within Christianity, lots of other arguments have erupted over time over things like whether we should be allowed to baptize babies or they should wait until they're adults in order to affirm the faith for themselves. There's been so many, it's incredible. But here's another big one. Universalists believed that everyone can get into heaven by being good and doing good. But Calvinists believed only a very, very small number of people will ever get into heaven. And so the two split apart. And Universalists, of course, are another branch of our family. So every time there's been a big argument, one group splits away and gives itself a different name. We've done it. That's part of our history. And it just becomes a different community, a different religion. And the thing is that it's still happening right now in the United States. Methodists, Episcopalians, Lutherans, and even some other faiths are all splitting up over arguments about whether LGBTQ plus people can be ministers or whether same-sex couples should be allowed to get married in the church. Now, because of our brains and our ability to communicate complex ideas, we've always been like that. Humans have always been like that. We're not going to change. I just can't imagine. We're certainly not going to change in any of our lifetimes, not even the lifetimes of the 9-year-olds. But we can commit ourselves to people who are like us, who strive to have open hearts and open minds and helping hands. So while there's a zillion religions in the world, this one is ours, and we have each other. So Sylvan, Asa, Maisie, and Tuz all asked really great questions, and they're such great questions. I could spend weeks and weeks preaching to answer each one of them and still not answer them fully because I don't have all the answers. And as I was answering their questions, each one of them was probably thinking, yeah, I already knew that. Because they have parts of the answers to their questions already, like the little girl in the story. And everyone here, everyone in our congregation has a part of the answer. And the thing that I think is cool is that if you put all of those parts of answers together, we all get a little bit closer to the truth with a capital T. And that's why we gather as a community. We have faith in what each of us knows, and we have faith that we can learn from each other. And these 9-year-olds, they're an important part of this community of faith in finding the truth because of the incredible questions that they ask and the parts of themselves that they share with the rest of us. So at the end of our little ceremony in the sanctuary, Lee shared these words with them. It was such a blessing today honoring these bright lights in our congregation. I'm so deeply impressed with the questions and the presence of the 9-year-olds in our lives. We ask you to look at our congregation, all these faces, and know that they see you and they honor you. We told the kids, these folks are here to help answer your questions and to support you as you grow and learn and explore. And I want to let you all know who are joining us online this morning, you are part of this community. You are part of the lives and the development of these 9-year-olds, and they're going to be looking to you. So I want to honor your brilliant and open mind. I want to honor your curious and compassionate heart. I want to honor your wonder-filled spirit. So